hello, everyone, and thank you for this great opportunity to be here amongst such esteemed collaborators. And I want to acknowledge firstly, though, that there have been many conversations that have been held on this land previous to ours. They're conversations that have started in dance, that have been marked on the territory with paint, and that have been about sharing story. So I really appreciate the fact that we are sharing story as well, and it's on the strength of those people before us who have been on this land that we stand here sharing those stories today. So I'd like to acknowledge all elders, past and present, and also the future elders. We've got a pretty big responsibility in having these discussions and the ways in which Indigenous cultures and Indigenous stories become part of how we understand creativity and how we look forward to the future as well. My heart leapt out, Pat, to hear of the storying around what's happening in Britain. But thank God for your slide about alliances, and that's, I guess, what I was thinking in response to what I was hearing today. And it's also acknowledged in Anne's great work here on creative ecologies, and because it really acknowledges a shift here from this idea of creativity as being about human exceptionalism and into much more a sense of common worlding. So that kind of shifting space from creativity and creative individuals to relationality. So when I think of creative ecologies, I'm thinking of schools as learning communities, and secondary schools, as you say, are really kind of at a crisis point, but a point that we need to be curious about, and that's what I guess would like to invite us all to do. Because in moments of crisis, we can often feel like that disruption is completely overwhelming, that these sorts of crises can be overwhelming and we often get paralysed. I'm working with Sheridan Emery, who's presenting tomorrow on her research in cultural wellbeing at AARE, and she and I have been walking through this space of what it means to be curious about a situation, particularly when you're feeling overwhelmed and paralysed by it. And I know that many of the teachers that I've experienced in Tasmania, for example, that overwhelming sense of the everyday and that overwhelming sense of wanting to be aspirationally creative in their practice, but feeling very weighted by some of these wider concerns. So how do we work in this balance of systemic change with individual capacity building? And I think that comes through alliances and creativity in making those alliances as well. So that sense of being creativity as we sustain our living and learning in a more than human world. And I've had the great privilege of the last week spending it with an amazing group of educators where we've been looking at what it means to question how we live in this more than human world, or some people, or some kind of areas call it kind of post-humanity. But it is a more than human world. How can our creativity and our approaches to how we make these connections and draw from concepts like creative ecologies to also recognise that we have great responsibility in this space, where young people are being encouraged not only to be creative individually, but being creative as one species in a multi-species world. And some of that beautiful work that's happening there, Pam was part of that understanding, and that kind of new understanding, or it's actually not a new understanding, it's actually an understanding that's been here for many, many generations on this land in Australia. And I think we really need to make those partnerships and creative partnerships with those who have walked these paths before. And just there was one other little thing that I was going with that made me think through the last hour of those storying and sharings around that research is some of you may be aware I've been working on this concept of curiosity, and I've been kind of deep down into this idea of the micro-pedagogy of the question. And I came back to some wonderful educators, Nora Morgan and Juliana Saxton, thank you, who are drama educators from a rich line of drama education innovators or creative practitioners. And so I've been looking at the pedagogy of the question again, and one of the things that's been really interesting for me in looking at the ways artists are working in schools is very much so what Maurice Galton's been talking about in terms of the creative pedagogy of the artist, sort of opening up this idea of curiosity as being a kind of artist's tool of trade. But the next step to that, I think, is not only what questions can we ask in that experience, but what does that experience ask of us? And right now, in this place and time, I think that curiosity towards what does this experience of crisis ask of us, and how can those alliances be made creatively, is really the joy of being here together today.
First of all, I'm pleased to have been following Mary Ann because she raised the question of story, and I think that's something that I'd like to link together with the notion of creative ecologies and how we might understand the sorts of work that we might be able to do within that, and as well relating it through to Pat's question about the NAPLAN condition. It's in some ways it is a problem we'd like to solve, but I think it's a condition that we're living with right now. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. I'll just keep going? Okay. So just in terms of the question of story, I mean, my concern is, I guess, basically that we have rehearsed. I mean, Pat's been very important in doing this sort of work. We have rehearsed over and over the problem of the high standard of standardness that we get to as a result of testing regimes. And we also understand that it does little for minorities. It does little for people who are already marginalised. I think we know those things. I'm interested, though, in how we can subvert, how we can get inside some of these things, and how we can work, say, within the context of an NAPLAN, where we can say that's not a creative ecology, but it is part of our schooling ecology. So my interest is in how do we teach in such a way that we can make some inroads. We can take something like, the work I'm doing now is looking at persuasive writing. It's a big issue in NAPLAN, and a lot of private schools don't do very well on it, especially boys' schools. There we go. So, not very good at persuasive writing. Now, in a sense, we could see that, and I can hear people say, creative writing. You know, we get a page, and we say to the kids, away you go. Now, really use your imagination. Really try to think. To me, that is not ideal. That's not optimal. And rather than do that, I would suggest that we talk about good constraints. One of the reasons I think we talk about good constraints is when we talk about risk, and I know that words come up a lot in Anne's work and elsewhere. Parents go into meltdown when we talk about kids need to take more risks. And so the word risk itself is risky. But there are ways in which we can mobilise the idea of how we can use good constraints. And I'd suggest, for example, with persuasive writing, and particularly writing like the sort of writing of faction, that we bring fiction and history together and help children build their ironic understanding, their capacity for irony. To me, what's creative is where not just we start with blank or nothingness, it's not just a light bulb in the head, it's not just think of something great. It is actually about creating a third space out of two spaces that that we already know, but that we can create a sort of unfamiliarity. So to me, the thing about faction is it allows us to create a third space. Now, I've been doing that sort of work with primary school children and through into high school. And what we can get then is an understanding of how two different propositions that both and neither can be necessary and true. So, for example, we were writing about Adolf Hitler as a really lovely little boy in a park in Germany. We get enough information about what Edelweiss looked like, what sort of time are we talking about here, how his mother might well have been, and the fact that it's his birthday. So we did some really tight writing where, for me, here's the sentence. I want you to write 2 more sentences. And we use somatic understanding, mythic understanding, romantic, philosophic, and particularly we move to ironic understanding. Now, that's good for NAPLAN, but it also means that we, in a creative ecology, understand the importance of good constraints, and we also understand, in Marianne's terms, the importance of story, and how can we use that, how can we colonise that space in order to, I guess, have multiple benefits. So for me, I guess I'd have to say that if you stand still, dogs piss in your leg. And I do think we've got panellists who are really seeking to do something new. This is about continuing to be players rather than bemoaning and wringing our hands. In relation just to the risk issue, again, I think we've got to be careful of the word. We could say, oh, well, Trump is a risk, but gee, hey, let's try something risky. Yeah. And I think of Hilaire Belloc's lines, always keep a hold of nurse for fear of finding something worse. I think we've found something worse, and I think Trump is too much of a risk. So we need to think about how do we, not just say to schools, don't be risk averse, but to think about how we understand the language we use can also come as a problem. And so we're always thinking about how do we create, and for me the issue is talking about not yet, talking about high challenge, and talking about good constraints that allow us to find a third space, and that third space